Can we start? Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. I think we are set to start, and we very much welcome to this panel on operationalization and testing. As you know, this year we decided, as it was explained by our chair at the beginning, to start with a new format where we are going to run parallel sessions on thematic issues. And amongst those issues, we have selected one that is going to be very core to our strategy going forward, which has to do with testing and operationalization. And so we are going to try to delve into not only where we are going, but also to understand from our panelists sort of the experiences thus far built and what could be the expectations. So I'm very pleased today to not only host this panel, but at the same time to have a great set of panelists who are so kind to invite and to accept our invitation and to come here to Brussels, with the exception of Claire, but I'm going to talk in a minute. So we have Matthias Boulard from the Management Committee of CaixaBank, Anna Cox, Head of Group Recovery and Resolution Planning from Barclays Europe, Claire McRae, she is Head of Resolution Crisis Management Division from the Central Bank of Ireland, and she's going to be connected remotely. There she is. Hi, Claire. And then Francesco Mauro, Head of Supervisory Review, Recovery and Resolution Unit from the EBA. So really very much pleased to have you all here, and it was great that you could take the time to participate in this panel. So looking forward for a very fruitful exchange. Before that, we have prepared a short slide deck where we are going to go through the essential steps on what it means testing and operationalization, how we see it going forward, and to set a bit or to frame a bit the discussion that we are going to undertake in this panel. So we are not clearly, when we talk about testing and operationalization, we are not talking something that we are going to start this year. Actually, this has already started. This is already part of the resolution planning work. And banks have already been doing this sort of exercises. So this is not something that we clearly will now start from scratch. If you look at this slide deck, which is, and in particular the left box, you'll see that since we start resolution planning work, clearly 2015, 2016, but then when we started moving, advancing gradually, we sort of started accomplishing crucial milestones. Amongst those milestones stands up, of course, the fact that today most of the banks comply with what we call the SRB expectations for banks. And one aspect which is of crucial importance is that steady state MREL targets have been broadly achieved. So there is today ample loss absorption capacity in the system. Also, the resolution plans today, we can consider them to be sort of fully drafted. Doesn't mean necessarily that they are maybe fully implementable, which is another issue, but at least they are fully drafted in terms of including the bank-specific resolution strategies for each of the resolution plans. And we have also, and this has been sort of cushioned or sort of based on the very close working relationship that we have been able to build over these years, both at IRT level, and IRT, when I mean IRT, I mean SRB and National Resolution Authorities, because IRTs are joint teams. So this strong relationship also with the teams from the banks, and I'm pleased to see that when I look in particular at the banks under my remit, which I'm more acquainted with, I see today that there are dedicated teams in the banks that are the interlocutors of the IRTs that carry forward the work that is needed to be accomplished in that field. And so there has also been a sort of capacity building from the side of the industry, which is quite crucial. And we have other stakeholders, like, of course, one of them being the GSTs. Of course, there is a close dialogue with the GSTs and the EBA, for instance, as a regulator, as a banking regulator, not legislator, not to confuse, but regulator, especially producing, originating all the level 2 legislation. And in that regard, this strong relationship has also been quite of the essence to fuel this working relationship. Then a set of operational policies and operational guidance have been adopted, and today this is the sort of the bulk of that complements level 1 and level 2 legislation. And we have, since in particular we started on a fully fledged base from 2019 to 2020, with what we called the RPC, the Resolution Planning Cycle, which is a structured cycle starting on the 1st of April of a certain year, ending on the 30th of March of the next year, and which is preceded by sending a priority letter to banks that we have been in the meanwhile able to anticipate as much as possible so that the banks can then include in their budgetary exercises in terms of resources. And these letters are typically sent on the first half of October, preceding the start of the RPC. So this in itself, I think, are crucial milestones that have been to achieve. And now we have to leverage on these milestones. And for that, that's where we are going forward in terms of the next phase, with an increased focus on operationalization and resolution strategies, as defined in the plan, on a holistic approach for testing banks' resolvability, and with advanced testing exercises also by resolution authorities, what we called SRB-led dry runs. So the increased focus on this operationalization and strategies, I was saying, builds very much on the work that has already been done. We are not, as Dominique said before, this is not a revolution, this is an evolution. This SRM Vision 28 is really an evolution in terms of the broader strategy that we are going to we are going to start implementing as of this year. For that, there is going to be a multi-annual work program that is going to be published soon, where all these elements then will going to be detailed also according to certain timing milestones. As I said, we are going clearly to leverage on experiences already carried forward. If you look there at this list at the very end of the slide, you're going to see that precisely what I said at the very beginning. It's not that we are starting from scratch. In 21, for instance, we started with the self-assessment of banks' MIS capabilities for bail-in and valuation data. This was then in the next year, in 22, in the cycle, further reflected, further advanced with a dry run on the bail-in playbook, where we focus very much on the bail-in data points. And then there was also self-assessment on the valuation data. That was then further, and then liquidity, of course, local collateral management. That was then incremented in 23 to an extended dry run on the bail-in playbook, and when we started also this joint exercise with the ECB on liquidity, that we are now going to move forward in 24 with the ECB SRB liquidity template, and then with the dry run on valuation data. These are already priorities for this year. So for the next cycle that we are about to start in 1.5 months, so these are going to be the priorities that have been the common priorities that have been set in the priority letters that banks have received in the last quarter of last year. So what does it mean operationalization? What does it mean testing? And what does it mean then the dry runs? If you look at maybe, and the best example here is to maybe go for a stylized case that you find in this box. On the basis of this stylized case, which by the way is drawn on a real case of a bank, so this is not invented, this is a stylized case, but this exists in practice. What we envisage with operationalization is testing is a sort of a continuum. A continuum that starts, if you take the case of the internal loss transfer mechanism, which is very core for the SPE banks, so the single point of entry banks, you see that what needs to be done in terms of operationalization is a sort of step-by-step kind of walkthrough and then complemented with simulation of the different steps. So the subsidiary in this case has to have in place local capabilities that allow or enable the subsidiary also to support the execution of the internal loss transfer mechanism at parent level. So you see all these individual steps from local governance approval needs, application of the national legislation because the subsidiary can be in a different jurisdiction, conflict of interest procedures, accounting steps, regulatory reporting, relevant MIS and potential operational legal obstacles. All this has to be sort of operationalized, implementable. And then for testing whether this is really actually implementable, we need to conduct dedicated dry runs that can, with time, are going to become more complex, both in terms of the entities, in terms of scope, and both in terms of the scenarios. This is how we understand this continuum between operationalization and testing. At the same time, as I said, this is going to be then complemented by our own exercises in terms of dry runs. We have already carried forward at the level of the SRB a few dry runs, which are complex exercises because they do not only involve the SRB and the relevant NRAs, they also involve the key stakeholders in the decision making. And one of the key stakeholders, as you know, for taking a decision on the resolution scheme is the Commission. But also the ECB plays an important role in the decision-making procedure leading to a resolution scheme. So, to the adoption of a resolution scheme. So these exercises that we have been already organizing in the last years will now be taken forward with even more complex scenarios, because we need to bring the situations, these dry runs, as close as possible to eventually extreme scenarios that we might be facing. So this is the next step. As I said, operationalization testing starts with the banks. Banks play a decisive role, but then also our own readiness here at the level of the SRM is key then to implement and to deliver on this. So now moving to the very end, what are the expectations for the industry? So the expectations for the industry are that we are expecting the industry to engage in this more, let's say, comprehensive testing exercises. And our commitment is that there is going to be a sort of trade-off. We understand that resources are finite, so we are not requesting or we are not expecting that you will necessarily need to increase substantially resources, but we're also not expecting that we will decrease resources that are today allocated to resolution work. What is going to be the trade-off is a sort of simplification that we are engaging in terms of the resolution planning, and that will in itself alleviate the burden that exists today in terms of the work on the annual RPC. So the trade-off is shifting the resources that today have been much dedicated to some parts of the resolution planning work and shifting them to the testing part. We also want to cover, in terms of the testing, we have been very much bail-in focus. 80% of the banks under the remit of the SRB have a bail-in strategy. It's true that many have also as a variant transfer tools. But one of the also lessons learned is that we need to become more ready, and we need really to make forward a quantum leap forward in terms of the transfer strategies. As you know, as we've seen with the spring cases of last year, embedding optionality in the resolution plans is of the essence. And for that, we need to craft the transfer strategies, not only with the normal transfer strategies that we have been thus far applying, like it was the case of Banco Popular or the case of Sberbank, which are sale of business, and I would call a bit like plain vanilla sale of business. But we need also to craft these scenarios for dry runs and for testing with additional scenarios where the transfer strategy is a kind of with a modular approach, where we design the transaction according to market appetite and according to the particular idiosyncrasies that we are facing in that particular moment, which means that we might have to resort to carve-out strategies, to APS, or ultimately we have to go for the bridge bank. So all this has to be factored into the sort of scenarios that we contemplate. And then, of course, moving to give planning certainty, and that's a thing that the industry is very vocal on and fully understandable. We need clearly to have this multi-annual testing in line with the EBA guidelines in place, and this is going to be then adopted, published on a fully fledged base as of next year. So this doesn't mean that we are not going to continue with the same structure in terms of organization of the plans. We are going to continue with the RPC and the priority letters, only that, of course, we are going to shift to these areas that I just mentioned. And then finally, the SRB expectations for banks, they have not they are not to be phased in. They have been phased in, but it doesn't mean that they are not going to apply. They continue to be the benchmark for resolvability assessments. This said, in 2024, we are going to engage in the revision of the resolvability assessment methodology. And then finally, from our point of view, the authorities' point of view, apart from closely cooperating and developing these sort of crisis testing activities, we have one of the key aspects that we want to further develop is clearly data availability. So we clearly have an ambition to work more with automation in terms of the generation processing of data, also from our side, but also from the side of the banks, of course. And this is something that we clearly have to move forward. And further to this, the stakeholder involvement, further stakeholder involvement is key. One of the key stakeholders that today has not been so much involved in the resolution planning work, for instance, are FMIs. We need clearly to do some work with FMIs, approaching FMIs, even if it has only for the educational purposes, but we need clearly to deepen our footprint in that regard. So, and then, of course, always continue monitoring the market developments. We cannot be oblivious to what is happening around us. So this is clearly a trend. I mean, we now are all trying to digest and process this information on the impact of social networks. This is an example, but the emerging risks. So we need clearly to continue also in that regard to deepen sort of our knowledge in that. And so we have to continue this work and see what's happening in the market, see what's happening in the banking system, also cross-border, also at international level. This is what is going to mark this. And I think with this and coming now to the panel, I would like, after hearing to that, you're not going to say, of course, Matthias, that you are surprised, totally surprised with this. I think your expectation would be this. But from your perspective at Caixa and considering also the testing active resolvability capabilities, could you just briefly describe a bit what you have been doing and how you would factor going forward in terms also on this broader framework that we are envisaging? And today, how would you consider the sort of where do you stand, if we could put the question in that way, in terms of your bank's readiness and to support this operationalization of this resolution strategy going forward? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pedro. Thank you very much for having us over. And congratulations, first of all, to the great conference that they're hosting. I think it's a marvelous opportunity to do networking, to meet each other, and to talk about that resolution. And thank you very much for the very clear presentation you just gave now in the beginning. And we very much heard your shifting of resources from one activity to the other activity, and not necessarily increasing resources neither from your side nor the expectation from our side. So very well received and heard. Thank you very much. Where do we stand? When I'm thinking about testing and testing capabilities internally, I like to think in 3 dimensions. On the one hand, the preparatory work that we are doing on structural work prior to testing, then testing of processes and testing of information data availability. Thinking of preparatory work, we are an SPE in CaixaBank, a single point of entry institution, business mainly in Spain. 90% of our business is in Spain, even though we do have a significant institution as a subsidiary in Portugal. So one of the big cross-border, let's say, institutions in Europe. And then within Spain, I would say multi-business, both in asset management as well as in consumer finance, and as a financial conglomerate, a very significant insurance holding also. So in that sense, thinking about structurally preparatory work, separability always is an issue. And so a lot of work has been done in the very beginning on separability of the international subsidiary of BPI, but also internally within Spain, obviously in our other businesses, such as asset management or consumer finance. And here the first idea that I wanted to bring up on separability, there's a trade-off to be made, and there's a trade-off to be taken into consideration. As a bank manager, we're here to owe, and we owe us, amongst others, obviously to our shareholders. And what we do want to have is a good and a sound and resilient business model, an efficient business model, gaining synergies also from our scale and scope within Europe. And we heard a lot this morning about banking union and what to do to make sure banking union is accomplished. And that means cross-border operations, and that means scale and scope within countries, also across businesses. In that sense, for us, it's very important that we can generate synergy effects, that we can integrate, operationally speaking, financially speaking, on a governance aspects also, and that not always obviously goes hand in hand with separability. In that sense, a lot of work has been done together with you, and I think we've done steps ahead in order to make sure that we really can manage that trade-off between being separable, being resolvable, but on the same time owing us to our operations and to our business model efficiency. Coming from that preparatory work then into real testing. I mean, you've been running through all the testing exercises that you asked us banks doing. On the one hand, on testing of processes. For me, bail-in playbook obviously is the one big process that we've been testing over the last years, both in walkthrough exercises on our desktop walkthrough. But then getting into role play exercises with a near real-time actually execution of the process, together with supporting documentation to really try to get us into a real-life example of testing. Both in the resolution entity, also in the ILL-TRM, together with the subsidiaries and the internal loss transfer mechanism. So exhaustive testing on the bail-in playbook, and obviously on information and data availability. Testing on the valuation data set, obviously the minimum bail-in data template, which we've been together with you in a sort of pilot testing exercise, also together with the SRB, to make sure that the interaction and the communication with you also is tested, which I think is a very important element. Not only that we banks are testing on our own and in our backyards, but we are really from the very beginning very close in contact with what type of information do you need, how do we transfer that information actually technically speaking, and then what do you do with that information once received, and so that we are from the very beginning in very close contact. What are some of the main lessons learned? For me, the one and foremost lesson, and this is why I do welcome very much the 2028 strategy now of the SRB. I think testing is the absolute essential tool to what we are doing. I mean, we are all in the same boat. We are all looking forward to generating operational resilience and resilience in the European banking landscape. And there we have a common interest, all of us. I think regulators, supervisors, and banks have a common interest to make sure that if anything happened, wherever it happened and in whatever way it happened, actually the one institution that is affected or the institutions that are affected are able to be resolved, are able to be saved. And that means that testing is of the essence in order to make sure that all the money that we spend, that all the efforts that we're doing, that all the MREL that they've been issuing and that we are paying a lot of money for it, at the end of the day, really is worth it. It was worth doing so. And if you don't test, if you don't make sure that wherever then the event might happen, we need to be prepared. So I think testing is absolutely necessary, and testing helps us really to fine-tune all those documents, all this preparatory work that we've been doing in fulfilling expectations for banks. I mean, there's a lot of loads worth of documents and of pages that we're all filling, but we want to make sure that this is really then practical, this is really enforceable, no? And then that means governance structures, that means decision-making processes that we've been able to fine-tune, that means definition of responsibilities, who is the one sending that one document or sending that one email or taking that one decision at any moment in time. How are the detailed process descriptions or the interactions with the SRB or with other stakeholders? I mean, communication plans with the NRA, with the SRB. So to really fine-tune all those communication points, I think is one of those lessons already learned. And obviously keep on improving MIS infrastructure. I think MIS infrastructure, if you don't test it, if you don't run it on parallel testing systems, you will never know whether it really is going to work out on those 24 hours at the resolution weekend or the night of resolution, as we heard this morning. No? So where do we stand? I think we've gone a long way. I think we have drawn a lot of lessons, but for sure there's still a long way to go. So 2028 sounds like a good target date to keep on working, to keep on advancing in the same gradual approach that we've been doing so far. But there's still a long way to go.
Yeah. No, thank you very much for those insights. Now, I would like just to hear from Anna. Anna, you are here kind of representing, although you're from Barclays Europe, but you're kind of representing a banking group headquartered today outside the European Union as a third country, but of course operating in a jurisdiction which has very much sort of, I can say, a sophisticated framework on resolution and also a sophisticated resolution authority. Now, you have been, I think, throughout your sort of function, also in contact with, let's say, many regulators and resolution authorities around the world. So, what I would like, would be interesting to hear from you, from your experience, is a bit this interlinkage between the different resolution regimes for full operationalization and effective testing of your resolvability capabilities on, let's say, crisis procedure, documentation, cooperation with authorities. And in complement, by the way, maybe to be interesting to hear from your experience in cooperation on the cooperation with the Bank of England, please.
Thank you, Pedro, and thank you for inviting me today. There's a lot of questions there, so I'm going to try to answer them with four sort of key areas. And the first one's coordination, the other one's communication, third one alignment with supervisory frameworks, and then finally on joint testing. So if I start with coordination, I think reflecting upon the Financial Stability Board's lessons learned from the 2023 bank failures, I do think coordination and cooperation has come a significant long way. And I think that's super important, especially for us as a globally systematic bank, having that comfort that there's cooperation and coordination between the resolution regimes, I think is a big win since the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. And I think when we think about testing and operationalization, our resolution strategy, which is a single point of entry bail-in, is we very much think about the testing from a group perspective, but very much consideration also to our key legal entities within the organization to ensure that the testing meets both our group requirements, but also our local jurisdictional requirements. If I then go to the next one is communication. So we, in the UK, we very much own our own resolvability. We've very much committed to owning our resolvability. And we prepare on an annual basis our testing plans on areas and internally, and then we share those with the Bank of England. Now, given that resolution is very much a joint effort, it is ultimately, also the resolution authorities need to have comfort that it's going to work and that they are comfortable enough to pull the trigger if needed. So I think this open communication between our authorities, both home and host resolution authorities, but as well with the firms is of importance to ensure that when we develop testing plans, they actually are aligned with the regulatory expectations and areas of focus, but also that we actually test things that are effective and also support the broader objectives. If I then come to supervisory alignment, we very much see resolution capabilities an extension of BAU. We really want to ensure as much as possible that they become something which is as BAU as possible, so rather than having separately purely for resolution purposes. And I think there might be a benefit from an industry perspective. There's further alignment between resolution capabilities, but also those supervisory frameworks which are related. So some I'm thinking about is, for example, the reverse stress testing frameworks and how you fit in resolution into those frameworks. How you link the recovery planning further into resolution planning, because there's a big synergy between those two. And then also with operational resilience. So if thinking about FMIs, it is ultimately you need to be able to access your FMIs in an operational crisis as well as in a financial crisis. And then my final one was a joint testing. And when I sort of look into the operational resilience work, there is already a lot of testing going on between authorities and firms around to ensure that both know how to operate together if you come into these crises. So that might be something that might be quite useful as well for resolution purposes, to just ensure that communication channel between the firms and the authorities work if you ever get to a crisis.
Yeah. No, and I think it's very interesting, this perspective, because just to remind that although we are primarily responsible at SRB for the banking union, banking groups, we also are responsible for the subsidiaries of the large third country groups. And one of the, what we usually call the host cases, and one of the perspectives, one of the key drivers of our resolution planning work with those entities has been always to make sure that the global SPE, so the global SPE, also works, that we are confident that it works when it comes to the banking union subsidiaries, and that they are not left out of the testing exercises. So I think this goes very much into what you were saying. So now I'll turn to Claire in Dublin, and Claire comes here. She's representing here, of course, the NRA, the also from that perspective, because NRAs are essential parts of the single resolution mechanism. And as you know, NRAs are the ones that implement the resolution schemes, apart from all the cooperation that on which we rely. But one of the aspects that is also important is that also NRAs are directly in charge of what we call the less significant institutions, and that testing also happens at that level. And what I would be very much interested in hearing from Claire, because the Central Bank of Ireland has also been, I would say, one of the front runners here in that regard, is what has been done in terms of testing at the CBI, in particular with dry runs for LSIs, and what were the lessons that you could share with us, and how do you see it going forward in terms of concrete crisis activities? So over to you, Claire.
Thanks very much, Pedro. I hope you can all hear me. And just to say apologies, I can't be there in person, but the conference has been fantastic so far. So well done to all involved. I mean, I would say also at the outset to support, Pedro, your comments in your presentation. You know, you're right that the work on operationalisation and testing it has started already. It's ongoing, but it is a key strategic focus for us, and very much aligns to the Central Bank of Ireland strategic focus. So I suppose when I think about a key component of what a credible testing regime is, I think, a very important part is the readiness of authorities to be operationally ready to manage a potentially failing bank and to resolve it, and that's both supervisory and resolution. So in terms of the testing that we have conducted, we have focused over the course of 2022 and 2023 on a series of exercises which look at capital deterioration in a fictitious LSI. And what we've tried to do is look across the continuum of failure, I suppose, from the emergence of supervisory concerns to the fail or likely to fail decision, and then into the development of the resolution plan. And I would say that the exercises over that period of time have been hugely valuable learning experiences for us as a supervisory and a regulatory resolution authority. A number of the key learnings that we took from it were the benefit of considering the qualitative criteria that would inform the supervisory judgment to make the failure decision. I think it was also very helpful for us to think about our internal governance and how we could maybe engage with each other, supervisor and resolution authority, at an earlier stage. And examples of that we explored were around information sharing, maybe in support of the valuation work that we both have to do as authorities. Also to reflect on early intervention measures available to supervisors, and what when they might be deployed and what impact that might have down the line in the continuum in support of the resolution action. I think it's helped us sort of give further focus into further work that we would like to do on operationalising the valuation process. We have very helpful guidance from the EBA and from the SRB on the valuation process, and it's really just to try to now drill further into that core data, capturing it, working with it. I think it's a really critical underpinning. I think then another aspect of why the exercises were helpful were that I suppose they also helped us look at, considerations around the projected viability of a firm, and assessing that in the run up to resolution. And I think that also helps supervisors think about decisions that they might make at an earlier stage in the continuum. So that was certainly helpful. And then, like all exercises, and I'm sure it will not be lost on anybody involved in them, it really helped us sort of look at our playbooks, look at them to see were they clear, were they accessible, did we need to refine some of our language. So that was certainly helpful. And we also, in addition to the LSI dry run exercises, were involved in a series of additional exercises concerning operational resilience matters. I know cyber is a big theme for everybody as well, cyber disruption, and we did that internally and also as part of the SSM exercise, which was really valuable. And I suppose key themes coming out of that from that testing process were around the importance of stakeholder coordination. I know that's been mentioned already. Increasing awareness around risk and then how we would mitigate that risk. So I suppose maybe just to close with a couple of practical points, I would say that for all exercises and approaching exercises, it's really important to think about your scope, because there's so much that we can all test, as firms, as authorities, but there is a risk that if you overscope it, that you don't necessarily capture the richness of what you're trying to get to. So I think you can be agile in your response. You can perhaps take a view that a desktop exercise might work for testing some aspects, a workshop might work, or there could be a full-blown exercise. And certainly our approach in the Central Bank of Ireland has been to start on a limited basis and build our capabilities into something more complex, and that has certainly worked for us. And I would also say as a practical point that, it's really valuable to involve your internal communication specialists, because, having that expertise in the room and those insights is really key to sort of managing firm failure. Dominique mentioned earlier, the positive message that was issued by the ECB and the SRB in the wake of the crisis cases. And I think there was a real power to that, and that the power of communications cannot be lost in all of that. So I think it's really valuable to involve them. And then maybe just finally to say, your question, Pedro, about, the impact of kind of real life crisis cases. Luckily in Ireland, we haven't resolved a bank. We haven't had to face that. We have a lot of experience in resolving credit unions, which are smaller financial cooperatives. And I think from each of those real life cases, what we've really found them valuable in kind of, successfully resolving them, helping us look at the agility of our internal processes, looking at the effectiveness of our stakeholder engagement, and then looking at our key document preparation to support resolution. So I would say that those lived examples plus all of the, the dry runs and the exercising all helps build and enhance our collective preparedness.
Thank you very much, Claire, for those insights, because Claire just reminded me that one of the areas, and I think with this experience, which is, as I said, a very kind of developed experience from the CBI and a very interesting one with the LSIs on dry runs, one of the areas that I forgot to mention when I talked about the dry runs, further to the decision-making process that we test, of course, in our own sort of playbooks that we have in-house, is this essential issue on communication. And this is something that has really to be tested, is of paramount importance, testing not only from our side, but also with the NRA, and also, of course, with the ECB. And this is something that might make the difference, but we have to be ready to address the communication challenges, and I think dry runs in that perspective are also fundamental in terms of getting it right. Now, with this, I would like to close with this first round of questions by turning to Francesco on the regulatory side, so, from the EBA. Because the EBA, as you know, has been particularly active by issuing the guidelines on resolvability testing, and I think it was June 23 that you finalized. And in those guidelines, the elements that are needed to be considered stepwise in starting as of this year, on the bank self-assessment, the multi-annual testing programs, the master playbook. Basically, Francesco, could you just share with the audience what are sort of the main objectives of these guidelines, and then maybe eventually from your perspective, what do you anticipate to see the challenges regarding the implementation of the guidelines?
Thank you very much, Pedro, and again, thanks also from my side for organizing this nice event and for inviting me to share with you our thoughts from EBA on these very relevant topics. Yeah, you're right. Resolvability has been at the center of the EBA activity in the last years. Since 2019, we have started our work on the more general resolvability guidelines, where we aimed at clarifying what resolvability meant for institutions and also for authority, of course, and also setting clear resolvability objectives in terms of capability. We thought we needed this EBA step in the form of guidelines that, as we know, are an instrument of soft law, to implement what were at that time FSB principle, and also to leverage on the best practices that we had seen in the meantime developed throughout resolution authorities, including the SRB with the expectations. The guidelines were also meant to sort of set a more harmonized, let's say, framework for resolvability in order to foster good communication in the situation where the dialogue was needed, not only between the authorities and the banks, but also among different authorities in the case of cross-border institutions. More recently, you correctly mentioned that in June 2023, we published our guidelines for resolvability testing. We have moved from identifying what were the main topics relevant for resolvability and capabilities to sort of operationalize them. And we create this framework, of course, with the support of all the resolution authorities and also with a very fruitful consultation, public consultation with all the stakeholders, where basically we try to sort of develop a structured dialogue framework, where we first identify the self-assessment report, that is an overarching document where the banks can show their understanding of the resolution strategies, the capabilities that need to be at the service of these strategies, and also how these capabilities are kept on a continuous basis. On the other side, from the side of resolution authorities, we identify the moment in which, with this multi-annual testing program, the moment in which the authorities shared with the banks what they felt was needed to be sure that capabilities to support the resolution strategy were well developed. Then for more complex banks, we also identified the so-called master playbooks that was aiming at sort of avoiding silos interpretation of the different playbook related to the different capabilities to put in place, and instead having in particular, again, for more complex banks, an overarching view and angle where to put together all the steps needed in the run-up to a possible resolution decision. So, from what I heard and also I read from your very nice presentation, I think we are very much into the direction of good compliance to these guidelines, which at the end of the day were very much also answering to the needs expressed by both banks, I think, and the resolution authorities. So now the time is to the implementation, which again, I'm very happy that is happening. But I mean, as you know, I mean, from the regulatory point of view, from the point of view of a regulatory authority, we have always to question ourselves what we could do better and how we could eventually think to make the implementation of this guideline the most effective possible. And I think one of the crucial points is the one that was touched by Anna, indeed, on the need of having these capabilities developed by the banks as BAU as possible. This is, I think, needed both for sort of developing appropriate synergies and also savings, I would say, from the side of the banks, but also from the side of resolution authorities to be sure that this capability are appropriately fed into, let's say, the day-to-day, let's say, life of the bank. And that we do not assist to situation in which, Birgit made the point this morning in the panel, where the same kind of capabilities tested twice may give different performance in times, if you want, right? Even in a relatively tight timeline. And of course, this is what we don't want. So this is clearly a challenge. How we can try to sort of address this challenge, I think the first point is for sure one of the most relevant for us, in particular EBA, where, as you know, under the constituency of EBA, we are both resolution authorities and supervisors. So it's to try to develop as much synergy as possible in the testing of the capabilities that are performed for different reasons. So you correctly pointed out to operational resilience, which for sure will be even more sort of prompted in terms of need of stepping up and testing and update in the near future, in particular in Europe, also with the DORA framework in its implementation. But also the recovery plan, of course, framework is another one. And on the EBA side now, we are very much focusing also on these aspects, involving more than in the past also supervisors in this exchange around the testing, to be sure exactly that these synergies can be put in place, identified first, and then, of course, put in place. Another, more than challenges, I would call it maybe area of possible improvements, or again, investigation of possible synergies, for me is, and for EBA in general, is on the side maybe of disclosure and transparency. In what sense? The bilateral dialogue between the banks and the authority, of course, is crucial, and it's happening, and it's the main, let's say, mean to produce the desired outcome in terms of the resolvability step up, if you want. But on the other side, we also think that more transparency in general on the resolvability can help this dialogue in the sense of making more understandable how the framework works, and also making more understandable how, let's say, the challenges in the resolvability are identified and can be eventually addressed. So on this side, I very much appreciated the initiative of the SRB of publishing the resolvability heat map. Already this is a very good way to communicate around how resolvability assessment is going. But maybe we could do also more in terms of the transparency coming from banks of the work that they are doing on resolvability. This is something that actually is already happening. The biggest banks are already publishing something around resolvability, but this is not always happening in a way which is generally consistent. It's a clear situation in which fragmentation is prevailing, and this is, of course, what a regulator as EBA doesn't like. And so we think that maybe in the future we could try to find a way to prompt more harmonization on this side, with the idea that more transparency on the work that the banks are doing on resolvability could increase their accountability, but also facilitate comparison with peers, and all in all, creating this push toward resolvability, which everybody, I think, is considering of a high value.
It's clearly one. This is one of a very challenging topic: the disclosure of information on resolvability to markets, and the other one that I particularly like that you stress is on this issue that even if we are the resolution authority for the banking union, it doesn't mean that we can simply forget about what's in the European Union, not in the banking union, the subsidiaries. Actually, we can on that assure that the resolution planning work at the level of the resolution directorate at the SRB also contemplates the subsidiaries in the European Union. So one of the things that we usually entertain close dialogue with those subsidiaries to understand what are the local capabilities that have been built, set up, for instance, for internal loss transfer mechanism, which very much also relies on those local capabilities. But maybe this, since we are approaching, not yet the end, but coming to we have already gone over the half of our session, of the time, I would just like to finish with, before I give the floor to the audience for any question, with a short round of final questions to each of you. And then again, coming back again to Matthias on what we can expect from now on, in the sense, how do you see it? I mean, you talked already very thoroughly on what you were able to build in terms of resolvability, and indeed it has been quite an effort, quite a journey, and indeed you have achieved also very considerable milestones on that. But how do you see what would be the key points for Caixa, for instance, in terms of enhancing and broadening your testing exercise? What would be basic? And by the way, what are your views, and what could you, if you would give a message to regulators, would it be? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pedro, for the last question. that allow me my wish list. Some very concrete points. First on what's next, and what's next on concrete issues. I think we're all still struggling with information availability on a daily basis, and I will come back to the business as usual versus supervisory on that point. I think there are very many processes which are obviously daily information. All our balance sheet is evaluated on a daily basis, but there are some processes which might be monthly processes or weekly processes. I mean, do need to ask ourselves the question: to what extent really do they need to be on a daily basis in order to, if we don't need them for business as usual operations, but they might be needed then for resolution planning, and we might need to strike the right balance between the effort put in and sometimes prioritize also the efforts that we're putting in for resolution planning vis-a-vis business as usual investments. As an SB, obviously consolidating information throughout our subsidiaries, both internationally as well as nationally, is an effort that we will have to keep on focusing. And MIS capabilities will never be at the end of hitting that one button to have all the information coming up. But automation will always be an issue, as well as data governance. And then taking it to the next level, most probably IT operationalization of bail-in. I think we're thinking, if we really want to go through a real testing of bail-in playbooks, we do need to take even IT parallel systems and run them on really simulations on parallel systems to really operationalize and fully test the entire end-to-end process, which is very, very costly, but which is something that at some stage, obviously, and thinking about a 2028 strategy, at some stage we should be getting there. And last but not least, we are preparing for planned testing, but we should be able at some stage to get into surprise testing or stress testing, most probably in the sense that it's not something that we've been preparing for weeks or months, but it might come as a joint surprise testing exercise, which again might be the next or the last step of maturity to what we want to reach. But for sure, it's necessary at some stage to really be ready for the real case. And in terms of wish list for supervisors and regulators, to be honest, we've been hearing quite a lot already. Alex this morning was talking about his 3 Ps: pragmatism, proportionality, and predictability. We heard about alignment, and I just can subscribe all of those. If I can add another P, it might be patience. I think we've been in a multi-year process so far with the expectations for banks, and it's good to hear that we will get again into a multi-year process also for testing. I think there's still a long way to go. There's a lot of investments, a lot of work to be done, and we do need not to rush through that, but to do it thoroughly, to do it well, and that means time and patience. No. And talked about clarity of expectations. I think we do need have a clear view on what a regulator and a supervisor wants and needs to make sure that all those work that we are doing is really focused, is really targeted, and really generates that outcome that we want. So clarity on your expectations, and as we have been hearing this morning already, I think is very important. Communication, alignment between supervisor and a resolution authority, both in the entire continuum from business as usual through recovery planning as well as resolution planning. I think here communication is absolutely key, both between supervisors as well as together with the bank. And then last but not least, and I need to go back to my very first statement that I did, as this is a lengthy process, this is a process where we need to invest a lot of money, where we need to put a lot of resources. Still always bear in mind that our first line of defense, and we heard it this morning, our first line of defense is a profitable business model, and put the money into our digital transformation in order to have a business model for our clients, and to be there for what is our job in our business as usual, and that should still always be our first priority, without obviously forgetting about resolution planning, and we never will. But let's have the priorities straight once it comes to the trade-off between one or the other elements of investment.
Very good. And that's the 5th P, profitability.
Probably, exactly.
Okay. So we are in a conference, we have already arrived to 5 Ps, so let's see how it ends up. So Anna, on a bit the same question, but what are you expecting in the coming months or in the medium term in terms of testing, but now a bit from a global perspective, also taking into account, for instance, that the ABA requests the major EU banks also to develop these master playbooks to address the need to interlink the various areas from the content-wise and from a geographical perspective. What do you foresee there in terms of your planning?
We already have a master playbook. Anyway, I suppose looking, like Mr. Labero said, it is a bit of it's a journey. And I think I would also echo patience. No, so I suppose from implementing capabilities, we've tested capabilities, and really our focus now going into 2024 is really about evidencing operational preparedness. And when we as I mentioned earlier, we do very much focus also on the jurisdictional aspects and ensure that the strategy we have in place, that it works both for our group, but also that it works for our legal entities. And for example, in 2023, we were focusing also to test conflict issues between the group and the legal entities to ensure that those and our conflict resolution mechanisms work between in a recovery and resolution scenario. Now, looking into 2024, One of the areas that we are keeping as a focus is simulations, so both at the group level but at our legal entity levels, to test communication, coordination, roles and responsibilities. Another big focus area is very much around restructuring. How do we, as a global bank, how do we restructure? How do we evidence that we're prepared for the significant restructuring we would be under if we ever get to resolution? But it is an evolving journey. You have to take one step at a time, and you learn every year. You learn so much from the testing and of your capabilities. And I find it. And the best thing is when you get those learnings, is then how you do address them. So you so it's a bit of an evolving journey as it comes along.
Yeah, indeed. It's a journey.
Can I put a wish list as well? I did hear, which was really interesting, about the EU, UK, and US cooperation and testing. It would also be very useful from an industry perspective to get some of the lessons learned from that testing, so we can also take those into consideration.
Okay, very good. I'll tell that to the chair. He's the one. But it's the TPLE exercise, it's called, yeah. But that's very interesting. Claire, now taking into account your experience with the LSIs, and considering this new sort of area for SRM strategy in terms of the testing and operationalization, my question to you would be, what do you consider crucial for the implementation of these strategic elements in the coming years?
Thanks, Pedro. Yeah, I mean, look, we have been undertaking quite a bit of work with firms to test sort of aspects of resolvability with them, and for example, in 2023, along with the SRB, you know, and in connection with their SIs, we've done work in respect of the bail-in playbooks. From an LSI perspective, we've been looking at deep dive work on operational continuity, and then for 2024, we're very much looking at, as many others are, valuation capabilities and testing those. And I think maybe then to step back and to answer your question around, you know, what is crucial to implement an effective testing regime or testing of resolvability capabilities. I mean, I think it's crucial that firms have good quality data available and that can be produced in a timely manner. I think it's also important that we test, you know, firms, you know, their internal processes, and to ensure that there is robust governance in place within the firms. And I know Matthias has touched on that earlier as well. I think it's important as well in managing, you know, any failure and in testing aspects of resolvability that there is a really clear understanding of the kind of key stakeholders in, you know, that we have to consider and what the key decision points are. And of course, if you're, you know, with an LSI, it might be more straightforward. With an SI or an international bank, there will be a greater complexity to sort of the level of or the scope of stakeholders to deal with. And I think in terms of implementing testing regimes, I think it's important, and to echo some comments made by Anna and by Matthias as well, that, you know, it's important for authorities to be clear in the ask of firms, and I think also to secure senior buy-in from firms in support of this work, because, you know, and I think to echo comments made by Francesco and Anna as well, you know, it really, resolvability work is becoming, you know, helpfully much more BAU in focus. And, you know, we got to the end of 2023 and great strides were made by our banks, but of course it's not a finish line, and it is very much a dynamic process. And as Dominique said earlier, it's a road we're all still traveling together and against a backdrop of evolving risks. So I think working together and being clear with one another as to what is needed will really help to build our collective resilience. So I think it's important that this work on testing resolvability and looking at operationalization broadly is not deprioritized by firms, and I think it's important for authorities to work with firms around that.
Yeah. Indeed, that's a very good insight also on the part on the governance, because what we have seen in many of the testing exercises is that clearly there is sometimes with the testing you identify many of the shortcomings in terms of the governance when it comes to resolution. I think testing have been very crucial in that, and I must share with you also that we have seen where we've seen most of the meaningful progress is precisely on the banks where you feel that there is a senior buy-in. Without that senior buy-in, usually you don't see that level of progress, as you could see. But maybe, Francesco, to end up this round of questions, what are the sort of key factors that you consider are necessary there to further improve resolvability and sort of an enhanced resolvability testing going forward?
Thanks, Pedro, for the question. I would say that, again, from our point of view, as a EU-wide, there is a regulator and in charge also of convergence and coordination throughout Europe. Our main concern now is to have that all the European authorities and the European banks can always progress in this journey that resolvability is. And this is the reason why we developed now a couple of years ago a program that we called European Resolution Examination Program, where we identify a number of areas that can, say, evolve in time, where we sort of push authorities to focus. We have started with only 3 areas: the MRL build-up, the MIS setup, and the liquidity resolution. Then we added operationalization of bail-in, and more recently, also in the context of the challenges that we have been made aware of, if we want more aware than was in the past, in the context of the recent spring crisis event, we have asked resolution authority to look more deeply also into liquidity issues and also into the operationalization transfer strategies. So this is an important thing, to be sure that these programs and the activities, of course, of resolution could be up to date also with respect to the challenges that we perceive in the current environment. And talking about the challenges, I would mention also what Sean Berrigan said this morning, said the crisis is not the best mean to progress, right? And so what other means do we have? The testing is, I think, one crucial mean to exactly understand and to try to incorporate into the activities of resolution authorities and banks the challenges that we may perceive thanks to the flexibility that these tools have, in particular the build-up of scenario that could be eventually adapted on the basis of, again, the current environment's suggestions, so to say. We can really use this tool to have the resolvability progressing on the basis of the emerging, let's say, risks. And also, I think testing is also crucial because it helps to focus efforts at the end of the day, because thanks to the testing, you can see indeed where it is really needed, both from resolution authorities and from banks, to try to really invest resources and solve the issues that were identified. So in this sense, I think testing is a wonderful tool to ensure that we can enhance resolvability. On our side, I would also to mention that we recently, in particular on the resolution authorities-led testing exercise, we ran a very nice sort of sharing of experience. We asked the authorities to present what they had organized in the last years, and we had something like 18 crisis exercises that were presented within the BA. This was a very fruitful experience and exchange of information, then brought us to both crystallize what were the main lessons learned in terms of how to improve the execution of the resolution framework, but also gave us very good idea on how to organize more effectively this testing exercise. And this led us to then, again, with the support of all the resolution authorities of our constituency, to decide to develop an handbook that the resolution authorities could use exactly for the organization of these exercises. And I'm sure that in this handbook, which is not yet developed, but we will also have a chapter related to the bank's involvement, because I can assure that if it's true that on the side of authorities, in most cases, there was not such an involvement, a direct involvement. I think that maybe the most advanced exercise used real bank data, but not involving banks. I have to say that authorities are very much eager instead to involve banks. And I'm sure that the joint testing, as you said, is the future at the end of the day, because the interest in testing the decision making, which is of course crucial, this authorities-led exercise, is not only in seeing how, let's say, to implement law on or internal procedure to take decision, but in particular how then this decision can be implemented at the level of the banks through their governance steps, which is very much in the interest of authorities, I think, and also at the end of the day of the bank, right?
Indeed, I cannot concur more than with that, exactly. Also from our experience with the dry run. So we are really close to the end, but I would just like to at least offer the opportunity for a question. Please identify yourself. Do you want to take it?
So thank you very much. I think, as we said before, it's a joint exercise, right? Valuation at the end of the day in resolution is an absolutely joint exercise. Whereas we as a bank, what we need to do is provide the information firstly, and then obviously, as you said, it's not all about pressing the button and counting information, but there's a lot of much more enhancement to that information that we need to provide. No, and then again, a step-by-step process and a journey. No? As for the time being, what we're doing obviously is trying to get those famous valuation data set available as much on the press of a button as possible, as much automated as possible. And here automation obviously is the name of the game, as a lot of information might be available in different systems around the bank. And what we need to reduce then is the rework and redoing of that information in later systems or in departmental systems to then make it available to the authority. But not only within the bank, and then enriching that data with those additional information pieces that we need in order for the authority then being able to run the evaluation models on and upon our information. So again, I think here joint testing and really making sure that process is as smooth as it needs to be. It comes down to so very basic questions of how do we then transfer that data from one place to the other? How does that channel into the IT systems, and to whether the data structure is the one that then the evaluation machine on the other side is really able to read in and to use. No, and we all have been in evaluation exercises when we have done M&A within in normal processes, and the richness and the complexity of that data on a bank by bank level is so tremendous that I think really here testing is the name of the game to try to make sure that this is really useful and useful, and we don't do separate exercises and separate efforts which might be sizable, but then at the end of the day, if you don't communicate the one information set to the other, might end up being not useful. So I think here again a journey. And it's necessarily a joint journey and a way to go. I think one of those things that we've done a long way already, but we're aware that this is a journey to go still.
So maybe quickly, so we've built models for anything where we don't today have the capability to value them in a systematic way, on an economic value basis. So especially where it's banking book assets, and then we test those capabilities each year to test that we can actually run the valuations across the bank.
Very good. Any last question? Just have 2 minutes. I don't know if. Okay, please. Yes, please. Do you want a microphone? Yeah.
I'll try to keep it short. Yeah. Thank you for your insights. I have two questions. One is on tooling, the other one is on involvement of the resolution authorities in dry runs or operationalization. Matthias, you already mentioned something which in fact I had as a question, but you raised the bar tremendously, because I think you committed yourself to come up with a dummy environment for your financial reporting to actually test the bail-in and see how that is reflected in your financial systems. I think that is quite an investment, but in general, it would be helpful if we as banks would know what the expectations are of the SRB, what kind of tooling we do develop, especially when it's only mentioned or only for the purpose of testing resolution, which is different than when you can take it as part of your business as usual, of course. So that's my first question. The other one is with respect, and you touched upon it, I think, in your last comment, the involvement of the authorities also in testing. We have experience with recovery planning for many more years, but that is more like the bank can do that by itself, at least, and there's decisions to be taken at the board level, which options will be executed, and so on and so on. But in a resolution, it's really more like execution. The bail-in playbook is an execution playbook. There's hardly any decisions to be made. The decisions are being made by the resolution authorities. The same, I would think, goes for communication. We can prepare templates, we can prepare a standard text. Testing communication is really difficult, because then you would have to publish that and see how your customers are reacting to that. You don't want to do that, I think. So the real testing, the proof of the pudding is in the eating, I think they say. But no, coming back on the involvement of the resolution authorities, I think also for communication, there is a tremendous important role for the authorities to play. Look at what happened and the communication around that of last year, but also Banco Popular. The bank in resolution is not the most credible party at that stage to issue any communications. It's like the CFO who says, we do not have a liquidity issue. So I would also argue for, or advocate, involvement or at least guidance from the authorities in terms of the decisions. And it would also help, just for the sake of the exercise, to tell the management board then that they will not be sent away immediately.
Very good. Thank you very much for those questions. I don't know, very quickly, do you want to take it up? And then I can...
A very quick reaction into, for the avoidance of doubt, I was not pre-committing. At least it was not my intention. But my point was, I think, at the end of the day, we need to get to a stage where, for testing to be really credible, we need to be able to have a testing in parallel systems for some of those bail-in elements that we are describing. Because I think at the end of the day, if you don't reach operationalization in those testing environments, we most probably will just not get as full as in the readiness that we wish to. That meant expectation management. We do need to have clarity on which type, and I mean, we were talking about equity capital or then AT1 conversion is one issue. If you're talking about obviously bail-in corporate deposits, it might be a very different type of simulation. No? So we need to talk about what we're talking about. We need to fix that. And we need to make sure that we have clarity on those expectations. But I do think we need to move forward in that direction, in that long journey that we're having in front of us. Because if not, we would be falling short. And then again, if you're falling short, and if something happens, and we are not ready as an industry, we might as well not have gone the journey at all. So I think if we want to make it worthwhile, we must ensure, all of us, that we actually reach the final state of being ready for the moment.
Indeed. So, I mean, we don't have much time now to expand, but I mean, also the testing, as you know, bail-in is very much jurisdiction specific. And you are coming from a jurisdiction that is a case in point with the claim right mechanism, as you know, in the Netherlands. So doing a bail-in in Spain or doing in the Netherlands is very different. So that's why it's essential that to get it right also from that perspective, from that angle, which is a jurisdiction-specific element that we have to embed. And from the side of the bank, what we expect basically is this capability, the capabilities on the side of MIS, both for valuation and the bail-in data set. Finally, on communication, of course, I think communication, what is expected from the banks, is well described in the expectations for a bank and how we measure. Of course, an essential part in the resolution day, in the resolution weekend, is from the side of the authorities. That is clear, and that's why I stress, I draw very much on what experience of Claire, what Claire mentioned before, on that we in the SRB-led dry runs have really to also do the extra mile on that dimension to get it right. So thank you very much for the audience also for the participation and for the interest. Big thanks for our panelists and also for Claire for having been able to join remotely. It was a very lively and very rich panel, for me at least, and I really enjoyed it. And last but not least, thank you very much to the comms team for all the support, and for the Resolution Planning Office here under the responsibility of my colleague Tuija, for the support also given to Matthias. Thank you very much, and let's keep on. Thank you. Thank you.
One morning I woke up and I knew it was on. A new day, a new way.